When you think of haunted houses, you might imagine an old creaky mansion on a hill, or maybe an abandoned building long forgotten by time. But one of the most infamous paranormal cases in recent history happened in a quiet neighborhood in Gary, Indiana. It didn't involve an ancient, cursed relic or a place with a dark history. This was a normal house with a normal family, until it wasn't. In 2011, Latoya Ammons and her 3 children moved into what they thought would be their new home, a fresh start. But within days of settling in, strange and terrifying events began to unfold. Objects moved on their own. Mysterious figures were seen lurking in the shadows, and something far darker than the family could have ever imagined seemed to take hold of their lives. What happened inside that house shocked not only the Ammons family, but also left doctors, police officers, and even priests questioning the limits of reality. What followed was an investigation involving not just local authorities, but medical professionals and the church. The Ammons case became so well known that it caught the attention of paranormal investigators and eventually inspired a movie, The Deliverance. To fully understand the gravity of what happened, we need to first take a closer look at the Ammons family. In 2011, Latoya Ammons, a single mother of 3 children, was just looking for a stable place to raise her family. Latoya, her mother, Rosa Campbell, and her 3 kids moved into a small rental home on Carolina Street in Gary, Indiana. The house was unremarkable from the outside, a modest 1-story building in a quiet neighborhood. Nothing about it screamed haunted, but that was soon to change. The family had barely unpacked when they began noticing strange things. It started small, almost innocently, like footsteps echoing through empty rooms or doors that closed by themselves. These incidents could easily be explained away by drafts or old plumbing, and for a while, that's exactly what Latoya did. Tried to rationalize the odd occurrences, but then things escalated. Latoya's children, aged 7, 9, and 12 at the time, began acting out in disturbing ways. One day, Rosa Campbell, Latoya's mother, noticed that swarms of flies were gathering at their screened-in porch, despite it being the dead of winter. No matter how many times they cleared them away, the flies kept coming back. It was as though the house itself was attracting them. Now, if you've ever had a fly problem, you know it can be annoying, but this was unnatural. The family couldn't figure out where they were coming from, and there seemed to be no reason for their persistence, especially in the cold Indiana weather, as if the flies weren't unsettling enough. Soon, things inside the house started to become even more bizarre. Latoya began finding mysterious wet footprints on the floor. They would appear randomly in the house, without explanation. No one had been outside, and the floors had been cleaned. It was as though someone or something had walked across the floor while the family wasn't looking. The strangeness didn't stop there. Latoya and her children started seeing shadowy figures throughout the house. It wasn't just fleeting glimpses in the corner of their eyes either. These were dark, human-like shapes that seemed to move with purpose. One of the most terrifying sightings happened when Latoya saw a black, shadowy figure pacing back and forth in the living room, leaving her in a state of paralyzed fear. By now, everyone in the house could feel that something was terribly wrong. But it wasn't until Latoya's children started showing extreme, disturbing behaviors that things escalated to a new level of horror. Her daughter, who was only 12 years old, would sometimes wake up in the middle of the night, screaming that someone was choking her, but no one was there. One night, Latoya's daughter levitated above her bed, in full view of her grandmother and a friend of the family. She was unconscious and unresponsive as her body lifted several inches into the air. Rosa and the friend prayed frantically, and after what felt like hours, the girl slowly descended back onto the bed, completely unaware of what had happened. This wasn't just a one-time occurrence. The children's personalities began to change in ways that couldn't be explained. Latoya's youngest son, a sweet 7-year-old, began speaking in a deep, menacing voice that wasn't his own. He would stare into space for long periods and growl at his family, his eyes rolling back into his head as if he were possessed by something not of this world. In another incident, the boy was discovered locked in a closet, speaking in a low tone, talking to an unseen entity. As the days went on, the children became increasingly violent, attacking each other and even their mother in fits of rage. They would speak in languages no one could understand and would often have no memory of what had happened afterward. In one visit to the hospital, doctors witnessed one of Latoya's sons being thrown across the room by an invisible force. The family wasn't just imagining this. They had witnesses, real professionals who saw these events unfold in front of them. It was then that the case began to take on a life of its own. The involvement of medical professionals and their documentation of these bizarre events would prove to be crucial later on when the story gained media attention. But even as doctors and social workers tried to make sense of what they had seen, things at the house were getting worse. When Latoya Ammons' desperate cries for help reached the local authorities, they were skeptical at first. Haunted houses and demonic possessions weren't exactly standard police work, but the situation had gotten so dire that the family had no choice but to involve others. That's when things took an unexpected turn. The more outsiders who got involved, the harder it became to explain what was happening inside that house. In April 2012, after months of experiencing unexplainable phenomena, Latoya took her children to see their family doctor, Dr. Jeffrey Onyukwu. It wasn't a typical medical visit. When they arrived, the children were acting erratically. Latoya's youngest son, who had exhibited violent outbursts, was growling and swearing at the doctor in a deep, unnerving voice. His eyes rolled back in his head, and he was said to be thrown into the air by an unseen force. Dr. Onyukwu, a professional man of science, was left in shock. He couldn't explain what he had witnessed. The doctor, deeply concerned for the family's well-being, contacted the Department of Child Services, DCS, suspecting that something more than a haunting was happening. Maybe the family was suffering from severe mental health issues, or maybe there was something else going on behind closed doors. It was at this point that the case attracted the attention of more officials, and soon they too would witness the unthinkable. DCS sent out caseworker Valerie Washington to investigate the Ammons household. Valerie, like many others, approached the situation with skepticism, believing this was perhaps a case of abuse or neglect. But she quickly changed her mind after witnessing the youngest son display supernatural strength as he attempted to attack his older brother. Things got even stranger when, during a visit to the hospital, Washington and a nurse claimed to have seen the boy walk backward up a wall. Yes, walk, before flipping over and landing on his feet. They immediately wrote this down in official reports, unable to believe what they had seen. As the situation grew more serious, Gary police were called to the house to investigate. Veteran police captain Charles Austin was among those who visited, initially doubting the wild claims made by the Ammons family. However, after spending time in the house, Austin himself reported feeling deeply uneasy. He witnessed strange cold drafts moving through the home, equipment malfunctioning, and even recorded unusual audio anomalies. In fact, one photograph taken inside the home showed a mysterious figure in the window when no one was supposed to be inside. These unexplained occurrences shook Austin to his core. When Latoya Ammons and her family reached the breaking point, they turned to their faith for help, and what followed was one of the most chilling religious interventions in recent history. Father Michael Maginot, a priest from the local Catholic Church, was brought in to assess the situation after multiple pleas for help. Maginot wasn't the type to jump to conclusions. He approached the case with caution, skeptical but open-minded. He met with Latoya and her family, interviewed them, and observed their behaviors, searching for signs of psychological illness or other logical explanations. But what he witnessed convinced him that this was no ordinary case. According to Father Maginot, there was something deeply malevolent in the house. It was the kind of evil that couldn't be explained by science or rational thought. The church didn't take this decision lightly. Exorcisms are serious, and they aren't performed without clear evidence that something demonic is at work. Father Maginot's official request for permission to perform the rite of exorcism was granted by the Diocese of Gary after he presented his findings. This was no easy process, and it required the church's approval at every step. Maginot would eventually perform 3 exorcisms on Latoya, each one more intense than the last. The first exorcism took place in June 2012. By now, the children had been temporarily removed from the home by Child Protective Services, and Latoya was desperate for a solution. Father Maginot performed the ritual at St. Stephen Martyr Church in Merrillville, Indiana. The process was long and grueling. Latoya convulsed during the exorcism, and at times she spoke in languages she didn't know. Father Maginot described the experience as a battle of wills between himself and whatever force had taken hold of Latoya. He used both English and Latin prayers to combat what he believed to be demons. During the first exorcism, Father Maginot claimed to sense a strong, dark presence in the room. Latoya's body would stiffen and shake as he recited the ancient prayers, and he could feel a resistance, a powerful force, fighting back. Despite this, he pressed on. The ritual lasted for hours, and while Latoya showed some signs of relief afterward, it was clear that the battle wasn't over. The second and third exorcisms took place shortly after the first. In these sessions, the resistance seemed even stronger. Father Maginot described these encounters as nothing short of a spiritual war. Latoya would scream and thrash, her body contorting in unnatural ways. Maginot was convinced that he was dealing with multiple demonic entities. During the exorcisms, he reported that strange things would happen around him. Objects in the room would shift. Lights flickered, and the atmosphere became thick with tension. At one point, Father Maginot claimed that he felt an overwhelming sense of dread, as though the demons were directly challenging him. After the final exorcism, Latoya reported that the strange occurrences had subsided. The children's behaviors improved, and the violence and erratic episodes ceased. Following the exorcisms, Latoya Ammons and her family made the decision to leave the house in Gary, Indiana. They relocated to Indianapolis in an effort to start fresh. Latoya wanted her children to grow up without fear, without the constant presence of something dark hanging over them. And while the family experienced some relief after leaving the house, the memories of what happened there weren't so easy to shake off. The media caught wind of the story in 2014, and soon the Ammons haunting became a national sensation. The details of the case were too sensational to ignore. Reports of demonic possession, children walking up walls, and even law enforcement officers backing up the claims. It was the kind of story that the public couldn't resist. The Indianapolis Star ran an in-depth article detailing the bizarre occurrences and the subsequent investigation, and from there, the story took off. News outlets, paranormal enthusiasts, and skeptics alike debated the validity of the Ammons haunting. Some believed that Latoya and her family had genuinely been terrorized by demonic forces, pointing to the eyewitness testimonies of police officers, social workers, and medical professionals as undeniable proof. Others were more cynical, suggesting that the family had fabricated or exaggerated their experiences for attention or financial gain. Despite the media frenzy, Latoya and her family largely stayed out of the spotlight. They had no interest in fame or attention. They just wanted to leave the past behind them. As the years passed, the house in Gary became infamous, known to some as the Demon House. But in 2016, it was demolished by Zach Bagans, a paranormal investigator who had purchased the property to explore its dark history. Before tearing it down, Bagans filmed a documentary about the haunting. The Ammons family may have moved on, and the house may be gone. But the question is, could it all be real, or was it something else entirely? That's for each of us to decide.